Okay, hello, good morning. It's March 30th. Looks like it's still kind of dark in here. Oh well. Um, Last video I made a couple days ago was about Saturn and Pisces. And today, Saturn is in a perfect trine to Mars in Cancer. So we've got a lot of water energy going on. And I, as soon as I made this video, the last one, I I mentioned there was somebody who was talking to me on Discord, and then it didn't take very long for me to discover, or at least come to the conclusion, that this is most likely just a scammer, right? And it kind of led me to reflect on the problem of scams online, or not even just scams, but the issue of I wonder what the right word for this is, because I don't want to just like not just saying authenticity, being an authentic tarot reader or an authentic divinator, but the idea that there's a scammer or something like that. But there's this kind of idea that to do divination work in the first place is kind of a questionable thing. That's because it's not scientific, or if it's not accepted by society, it's kind of outside the norms or whatever, that it's seen like, even if you were a legitimate tarot reader or a legitimate astrologer, people might suspect you of being like a fraud or a phony or running some. And especially if people don't believe that this stuff is even real in the first place, they might just put everybody who does this into this category. And then there might be people who, I imagine, these scammers don't, you probably wouldn't be using the pretense of doing tarot readings to scam people if you actually believed in the tarot, or that if and you wouldn't be using spirituality to scam people if you actually believed in spirituality. Because there's this kind of thing, like, if there are these sort of, you're talking about like mysterious forces, like, you don't want, if you actually believe with this stuff, you don't want to abuse those forces. Probably you don't want to put yourself on the wrong side of that, or to make, but I'm not gonna. The thing is, what am I saying here? I was thinking about this, though, is that I think that the kind of climate that's around this kind of stuff, I don't blame people out there for their skepticism or whatever, or people who feel disillusioned, I would say. And I was thinking about making this video kind of on this topic of disillusionment. And it's also to think about the images of Pisces, right? Because Pisces is like two fishes, right? And the idea that there might be different kinds of disillusionment, right? That there might be one kind of disillusionment that just is like the whole thing is just phony or something like that, and I'm going to say rational and scientific and material, whatever you would say. And then another kind of disillusionment where there's something about it where you had some sort of hope about it, or there's something you were expecting to get out of it, or there's something you would expect it to be, and then you're just feeling kind of disillusioned because you're like, it's obviously not that. Whatever this is, it's obviously not that, and I can write that one off, right? But just because you might be delusional, I mean, it doesn't mean that the disillusionment. What I wanted to say is that it may actually not be an antithesis to what you would call belief or faith or something like that, but the disillusionment can actually help. And like, I have to admit that part of what brought me here to this point where I'm at today is that I went through my own kind of process. I was in groups online to do with spiritual emergence. I guess I still am. I'm just not as super active as I used to be. But that there's this whole thing of like dealing with madness or whatever, the madness that comes up, and that I had to get myself out of that and to not be crazy. Well, I don't know if it's questionable how crazy I ever was, but if people think you're crazy, then that's enough. For all intents and purposes, you are crazy if people think you're crazy, if people call you crazy. So It's there's this necessary to use discernment and judgment to to try to figure out what the actual truth is and what is just like an illusion or something like that, and to clarify. And well, I use this idea of separating the wheat from the chaff. Like, what is the stuff that you can get rid of, and what's the kernel of truth that is important to take away, kind of thing. Um, there's a kind of as a refinement process, anyways, right? There's something the thing that happens though, that when I don't know if you want to call it or whatever, in these things that happen to people, whether it's a spiritual thing, whether it's a mental health thing, or whatever, like sometimes there's some overlap or something, but there's this thing that happens where you know, we're all conditioned, we're all programmed, we're all conditioned, taught, we have these ideas, we have these way that we interact with reality that's been shaped a certain way. If you do some things, you get punished. If you do some things, you get rewarded, and that you've been trained to be a certain way in reality, right? And then there may come moments where you start to think or start to realize, wait a minute, the actual reality that I'm dealing with doesn't match the conditioning, doesn't match the training, right? And that, or it could be that your own situation that you've built up for yourself in reality starts to feel like a castle made of sand. And I think that with the Saturn and Pisces archetype, this might be the case or something like that, is that whatever it is this structure is not, it's obviously not completely fixed. It's obviously permeable. It's obviously subjected to change. There's obviously a degree of relativity there, and that you cannot. There's certain things that if you try to put your you know, your ground you stand on is based upon these things. You can only stand on that ground for so long before it gives way, right? And you need to stand on a firmer foundation, because these things are not as absolutely real as we take them to be, right? Which is not to say that it's just that we live in a dream, a complete fantasy, that these things are relatively real, but you may there may become a point in time where you start to be kind of, you may get this impression that what you've been taught isn't really the truth, and that there's some other truth out there, right? But the problem about this realization is that there can be a lot of expectations, or basically just a whole bunch of other stories that are there that, you know, we go into this stuff not neutrally. We go into this stuff with lots of media, lots of things that we've been conditioned by to tell us, if we ever have a spiritual experience, what to expect from it, right? That, oh, I'm having a spiritual experience, I wonder if this or that and this and the other thing will happen. I wonder, oh, I'm or whatever, right? You have this idea of what or if it's maybe a fantasy thing, like, oh, it's Elfland or something. I'm gonna be dancing with the elves and fairies, and where's the dragons and the magic castles coming? You know, like, you're all expecting something based on some story that you've been told, right? And that there's something about that which may contain a degree of truth, that may be like a parable or something like that. But if we're at some point in time, you have to realize that whatever the fairy tale mythic story is and whatever real life is are not the same thing, although and maybe in some way they are the same thing, right? And this is what I'm trying to get at with this idea for Pisces and the two fishes, right? Where there could be, like, you could go into it expecting a certain mythic fairy tale, like, wow, I thought that we lived in this rational scientific world, but we live in this magic fairy tale world. I'm so excited to see how that's going to unfold and what that's going to look like. And then all of a sudden, like, it didn't take too long for you to start to be like, oh, wait a minute. Well, if this actually is true, and the way it's not going to be the way that I think it's going to be with my preconceived idea of it, and actually a lot of these preconceived ideas are things really just actually getting in the way. That as soon as I get trapped by these preconceived ideas, then I'm not actually experiencing this sort of magic reality anymore. I'm just going around in this old story that somebody told me, right? But the thing is, the whole thing about that though is that the old story somebody tell you might actually have a kernel of truth as well, right? So there's some. It's kind of funny because you can't. Still at the same time you can't dismiss the old story somebody told you. That there may actually be something that in your, I'm not going to believe all these ideas, I'm not going to believe all these old stories, I'm just going to like take the world as it is and be awake. There might actually be something in the story that is valuable that you're missing because I don't read old stories, you know. So it's not, there's something about these two fishes that like you could be disillusioned to some extent, but there's like the kernel of, like I was saying, separate the wheat from the chaff, right? There's a kernel of truth there that after all this disillusionment, you're like, oh wait, hold on, what's this thing that I'm not disillusioned by? And then you keep that one, right? And then you're kind of like, oh, okay, I got this one now. There's, I don't know, I'm kind of just rolling with this. There's other things that I had ideas for the Pisces thing, which is, I'm going to apologize to some extent anyways, because in my last video, I ended up maybe, I don't know where it came from, maybe it was because it was garbage day, and maybe I was like, kind of aware of all the garbage trucks moving around outside and stuff like this, but for some reason I got triggered by this, and it was also because I was talking about I made this Blade Runner reference, and Blade Runner has all this stuff about these garbage recycling techno waste, right? The Blade Runner 2049. There's something about, like, getting preachy, I guess, about, my distaste for electronic waste, or the idea of our consumer society that is so much disposable stuff and all this stuff, right? But then, and I did also kind of try to qualify that, saying I'm not perfect either, and I'm trying to criticize a pattern rather than, judge people for their, because people, we're human beings. We can only do the best we can, right? The thing about all that, though, is the issue. I mean, with the issue with being preachy, the issue with coming on here to make these videos with some kind of a message to say that you should be like this or you shouldn't be like this, or like even just making a prescription. I think there's an issue, without being preachy, about like this is some higher moral thing you have to listen to. There's this issue that's like saying, hey guys, look at this astrology transit coming up, right? And saying these are the things that you could be pulled out by, right? You could say that we have this Venus, I'm doing this on the Saturn and Mars thing, but Venus and Uranus is also perfectly conjunct today. And you could say that there's all these good, I kind of maybe referencing Adam Ellenboss in a way. You could say, it's a popular way to do it. You could say that this is the pros and the cons, right? Or you could say these are what I like, or this is what I don't like. Or you could say these are the shadow qualities to watch out for, and these are the positive things we want to affirm as being good about it, right? So in any of these situations, you're affirming one thing and you're denying the other thing, and you're saying that, whatever it is, there's some hazard, right? Like of being like, Uranus could be shocking. Like, Uranus, it wants to be revolutionary or wants to shake things up, but please people, just whatever you do, make sure not to be too shocking, make sure not to be too disruptive, keep it cool, everybody, all right, thanks. And then when you do that, there's this kind of like, I feel like there's this kind of impulse in people where who knows if it's like people who watch your videos or if it's just you put that out into the universe and you're like, all right, I'm me being the smart astrologer. I know what's up. I've got the insight to tell people to watch out so they don't do this and to do this instead. And as soon as you do that, it's like there's this kind of like counter force where people, like, I don't know if they're doing it consciously, but they will jump to do the very thing that you're suggesting not to do. Like, this would be a good time, people, to not impulsively spend money on stuff. And then people will be like, well, no, I'm just gonna, like, you can't tell me what to do. If I want to spend money, I'll spend. So I realize in my own, regardless of even making astrology videos, in my own process of divination, that there's like the resistance, right? That there's you might have an insight that's like, oh, now is not a good time to do this, but it is a good time to do this, right? There's this thing that accepting that truth versus resisting that truth. And when you're resisting that truth, there's a tendency to be like, screw you, I'm just going to do it anyways because that's, that's me. You can't do, like, whatever. It's the defiant, resistant personality. And I think that this might be something in Saturn and Pisces, because Saturn rules the opposition, right? It rules opposite signs. Like, you've got Cancer, right? And then you got Capricorn, right? The Capricorn being the Saturn sign, Cancer being the moon sign. They're opposite, the opposition. So there's this sort of opposing quality with Saturn and Pisces, where if you make, I feel like and it also has to do with ignorance too, right? Where there's a sort of thing where you're like, if you put it out there that this is the higher message that we can all, get from this, people will be like, there is no higher message, and I'm gonna do the exact opposite. And then, and if you think that that's wrong, I'm gonna show you that it's actually right. And this is funny thing. It's like the yin yang thing, right? It's like, even in the yin yang, the black side has the little white dot, right? So it's like, and in some way, if the person even if they don't even believe in that, or that kind of way of looking at things, at some level, they know that they have the white dot in their black half, and that they're gonna, in some way they're not even wrong about it. They may actually be at some relative way true, but they're not seeing the other side of the story, though, right? But there's a relative fractional truth in that position, but there's this kind of thing of like this kind of, it feels kind of futile to make any recommendation on what anybody should do. And it also kind of feels like, but it also, there's this thing too, is that if you do that, then it's also this whole thing about hypocrisy, right? Where people are kind of like, well, who are you to, are you doing all the things that you say, but of course, these are the things of having virtues or ideals or things that we aim for, whether you actually are 100% good with them. But there could be something about the more you kind of jinx yourself in a way, right? By going on there and being like, these are all the things I stand for, right? And then you turn the video off and then upload it, and you have to live your life, and then you're kind of like, oh, okay. Now that I put all that online, now in my real life, I have to see all the ways that I fall short or something like this, right? You can't, if you put a perfect image out there, then what you're left with is all the imperfect stuff that you don't put out there, in a way, right? And then, or then, another thing you could do is you could just accept that whatever you're putting out there is imperfect, and not have the expectation for it to be perfect, and then the perfect thing is not subject, if something's criticized, well, whatever, it's imperfect, it just is what it is. It's par for course, man. So, what I mean. So maybe you get what I'm kind of aiming at there. But anyways, this is, as soon as I finished that video and I was talking to this person who was obviously trying to scam me, and this whole issue of what it is that I'm trying to do, of whether this is real, whether I even have a chance to, I'm not really aggressively trying to find clients and customers and stuff like that right now. I'm doing this mainly because I feel like I need an outlet to express myself. There's a creative process where, if by putting things out there, and if I'm talking a bunch of bullshit, then I have to kind of deal with that. Whereas if I'm just talking a bunch of bullshit in my own journal, and it's not connected to anything, then it's like. But then there's also this issue of doing things publicly versus trying to do whatever I want to put out on the media, and that maybe that's but it's for everything has its own place and everything has its own time. So I think that you can kind of measure out what this channel is supposed to be, what this video is supposed to be, and keep it in proportion, right? And it's not too bad. But yeah, there's this thing with disillusionment, right? That my main point that I'm trying to get at is that I think when it comes to spirituality or whatever is that it's, you know, it's like really tied up with stuff like the self-help industry and the this whole thing about like therapy and healing, and that people are like looking for usually looking for a difference in their lives, or they're looking for some kind of thing out of it. And I don't know, you know, I don't want to make any hard statements about whether that's like a complete waste of time or not. But I do think that at some point in time, if you stick with it, there might be a point where some people stick with it to the point where they hit this point where they kind of realize something about it, and you're like, oh, this is obviously, if I stick with it, it's not going to give me this thing that I thought that I'd get out of it. And that is a moment of disillusionment, right? And that it's not even like it's what I'm trying to say is that disillusion, that kind of thing where you hit that thing where there's a disillusionment out of something, that you can go both ways. You can be like, I'm disillusioned, so I'm like, this is a waste of time. I'm gonna get on with my life and actually put my efforts towards something that will get me what I'm looking for, rather than bother with all this nonsense. Or else you can say, oh, like the other side of it is like, all this stuff I was expecting, I'm disillusioned by, or that I can obviously see that this is so much stuff. Like, what was I expecting to get out of this anyways? You know, and like, so and just kind of being clarified that there's a lot of stuff. You may not get the big cookie you're looking for, I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Like, you may not get the gratification you're after, or that it may not give you the sense of security or whatever. There's something that you're trying to get out of it that you necessarily have to give up on, or see that you're not going to get. And it may be different for each person. Maybe each person has their own version of this, right? And then you can leave it, or else there's something about like you go through all that disillusionment and you still have a reason to stay, right? After all that process of disillusionment, and you still have a reason to keep going with it, because there's all the stuff that is you can do that with. There's going to be stuff that you're not disillusioned by, that withstands. It's like the tempering, right? Like tempering in the furnace or whatever. There's some sort of like critical thing that is, you're not going to be you can see, and that is what, you know, I would call the higher truth or whatever. But it's a you know, it's often described as a transcendent truth that's difficult to talk about and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to try to encapsulate that on this video, right? But there's this idea that, that disillusionment is actually a good thing for the spiritual path. It's not a sign that you're, you know, that you're on the wrong track to be facing doubts and disillusionment. And it's actually, if you read what Buddhism talks about, what the Buddha had to say, is that the Buddha actually encouraged people to be skeptical. The Buddha encouraged people to be doubtful. The Buddha said that, like, you have to verify everything for yourself. You can't just take my word for it. You have to actually try things out and see, come to your own realization, because some other person's realization isn't going to do you any good. This is and then, and also not to be, and if you do have a realization, there's a certain modesty that comes from it, because essentially these realizations they're accessible to every human being. It's not, you don't have to be like, I'm of the elite, like, class of the Pope and the papacy of, like, there's the one sort of, like, elite group that has all the hidden secrets. It's like, there's this thing, I think there's a kind of thing where people get, like, there's a sort of judgment that happens where if you see a person who's, like, the weird, you know, mentally ill person on the street who's talking to themselves, and they have like some cardboard sign about Jesus, and they're gonna look completely nuts, and they're just spouting all this nonsense to say that this person is obviously delusional, and the well-to-do, clean-cut, you know, Christian householder with his wife and kids living the proper life. This guy obviously knows the truth, and the guy who's. But the thing is, though, is that there's this thing about the truth, which is kind of like, nobody has a monopoly on the truth. Nobody has, you know, just because you conform to a certain image, a certain preconceived expectation, a certain coded a thing that we've had imprinted on us that says if you're a good person you look like this, if you're a bad person you look like that, and you don't need to have too much ambiguity about it. That we are very clear who we judge to be good and who we judge to be bad, who we judge to be wise, who we judge to be ignorant, and that we all it's no mystery about it, right? And that we can say that like, oh, I know all these people have the right answer and these other people are just wacky, insane, people that are you're just going to get deluded by, or these are con artists or something. And that there's this attitude when you start looking at things like that, you start to meet people when you start talking about spirituality or something like that, or spiritual teachers or something like that. And there are people who are like, there's so many con artists, there's so many charlatans, there's so much garbage out there that, but if there is spirituality, it's like only, it must be a really elite, special thing. Like only, you gotta find the one guy who's got it, because everybody else doesn't got it. And there's only one guy who really knows the secret answer. And this guy, and it's like, and anybody who tells you that they have something is just lying to you. And there's something about it where, if you can't, it's like this kind of attitude that it's an entirely rarefied thing that you're after, that is like completely hidden and secret, and that you can't, and that if you look for it in like a really obvious, easy source, like if you just so a good example I think would be like somebody like Eckhart Tolle, because he's really popular, right? Like really popular spiritual teachers, because they're popular, they obviously are full of shit, and we have to go after some secret rarefied thing that like nobody knows about, that is the only this thing has the secret. It's like, I'm thinking about this as a kind of like a wild goose chase, right? You're instead of just going to the first place to look for it, we have to like treat it as if it's like this complete like obscure thing that but then once you find it, you're kind of like, oh shit, maybe oh, no, I'm not gonna give it away. But there's I'm just saying that that's probably not it, right? That it's this rarefied secret thing that is like completely hidden and stuff like this. That it's actually probably something that more people have access to than you'd like to realize. Or the whole thing is that you probably have access to it already, and you're just unconscious of it. And that's the whole Jungian thing of becoming conscious of the unconscious. Is that you essentially there's nothing to be gained that you don't have already, other than this process of disillusionment, or this process of refinement, of clearing things up a little bit, right? And it's true that there is no superiority really to be had, because as a human being we all have a kind of a birthright to this thing. You can have these experiences that will make you feel like you're like connected. You're like, it's really special. It's a really special experience, but there's no guarantee that like every Joe Blow on the block could be having these experiences, because there's the unity of the human experience, of the human psyche, the human soul. It's here for everybody. It's not just a rarefied thing, right? However, like I said, that could be one of the fishes, and there could be another fish which is the polar opposite of that truth, right? And so there's also this thing that I notice people talk about, where it comes with the ego and stuff like this, right? Where it's just funny to me, because it's like, because I guess it's the only problem with spirituality is kind of like spirituality is in its own category, right? Where if you were talking about like, people who are like whatever, like to work out and stuff like that. Like you wouldn't criticize people who work out, who get in shape, for feeling superior because they put effort into whatever, working on their body. Because like the whole thing is that like the whole point is that we have this really coded into our society that let's say if somebody is fat, if somebody has body issues, it's like there's this program that says you're not supposed to be confident if you are a certain way. And there's all this politics about like whatever, fat shame. I don't want to get into all these things, but I'm saying that there's like, there's tons of stuff where people are motivated by shame and insecurity to improve themselves, to change themselves, to become a more superior version of themselves. And yet it just is ironic to me that like somehow if you are going to be like, well, I'm going to take some time to contemplate and meditate and all this, but it's such a faux pas to suggest that anything about that's superior. Whereas if you were going to be like, well, I'm going to make sure I'm going to start jogging, I'm going to weight lift, I'm going to cut some junk food out of my diet and all this kind of stuff. If people are doing that, is that superior or is that not superior, right? If you're making all these things to live a healthier lifestyle, to be a better person, and all this kind of stuff, are you superior? Or are you not? You're just as good as people who don't do that, right? If there's no judgment. You're just doing this. But the thing is, if there's no judgment, what is your motivation for doing that? If you don't judge, if there's all these things that you want to do with your life that you think is a good thing to do, like to be healthy, to be strong, to help improve things, then aren't you saying that you judge that to be a good thing to do, and that to do the opposite of it, you judge that as not being a good thing to do, and that by doing the good things that you have a self-image of yourself as being a superior to the things that you do, that seems like it's really built into the normal way that we would make decisions about everything, right? But there's this funny thing when it comes to, as soon as it gets into spirituality, it's like, that's out the window, because spirituality has to do with wholeness. Spirituality has to do with both of the fishes, right? That there's going to be one fish that swims this way, there's going to be one fish that swims the other way, and that the more you choose one fish over the other, you're forgetting about the other fish, basically, right? And there's I think that's another thing I wanted to talk about with Saturn in Pisces, because I was talking about the dam wall, like a hydroelectric wall, right? But it could also be like a wall that separates the two fishes, where the two fishes aren't seeing each other, the two fishes aren't talking to each other, the two fishes are alienated and dissociated from each other. And this is because one of the fish thinks is disillusioned by the other fish. The other fish, or it could also be the thing about like the reflection, the mirror images, right? And I recently came across this idea that, I think it goes with Pisces, that the idea that the heavens, like the sky and the ocean, that is the blue of the ocean a reflection of the sky, or is the blue of the sky a reflection of the ocean, right? And the blueness, right? The blueness that comes from Pisces, the image of the waters, the holy waters that are a very spiritual thing, and the idea of reflecting, and the mirror images, and the idea of judgment, where if one image is judging the other, is really judging itself, or something like this, or that they think they're swimming in opposite directions, but they're not. And there's this weird kind of contradiction that goes with it. Okay, I think I've expressed my idea for today. Hope you like it. I've noticed I'm losing subscribers, so if you guys want to like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. I have doubled my subscriber count more or less since I came back to the game of making videos. So I'm actually I haven't broken 100 subscribers yet, but I'm whatever. I'm approaching it. I'm considering doing maybe the first person after 100 to ask for it. I can do a reading for free or something like that. You can be my free reading centennial, subscriber promotion or whatever. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I've said it now. So if you want to hold me to what I've said in this video, you're welcome to, I suppose. Okay, thank you very much.